Vicki Ward is joining us as first interview on publishing day. So the book, I don't know how many of you pre-ordered, but the book is now available. I just I just finished it. I read it over the weekend. Um, and so I really like the way it's written because it kind of drags you through step by step. You feel like you're going through it, in real time. You go back but I wanted to start with what I'm really interested in that we didn't get to discuss last time, which is your research and investigation there. Like you went and basically moved into that town and you met all the people. Like, is that the way it always goes with this type of book, or is that like, have you done that before?
Yes, I actually did it before. The experience it was closest to was when I went for Vanity Fair one time. I sort of parachuted into Tampa, Florida. And that was when David Petraeus, the general, had had his scandalous affair. And there were these two local women in Tampa, the Kelly sisters. And again, Tampa was a sort of relatively small community in Florida. And I came in as sort of completely outside, and you land in a place and you have to very quickly talk to people and get your bearings. But I remember learning from that experience. And in fact, another time, actually, when I did completely different story, but one about Hewlett Packard. And again, I had to go to sort of Palo Alto quickly and get a lot of information very quickly. This was many years ago. And it's always the same. You need to have one person. You need to have found your person ahead of time who's sort of going to act as your guide and who is able to introduce you to people. And so in this instance, my guide to Moscow was a guy who's only mentioned sort of briefly in the book. He's a guy called Rand Walker, and he's quite a well-known therapist, and he used to be the police therapist. And but I when I was doing the initial phone work from New York, I got hold of him and I explained to him that sort of that Jim and I had a vision for the book, and that it was, we wanted it to be as much about Moscow and the town and the place as about the tragedy of the murders and what had happened. And I actually, Jessica, the reason you and I are having this conversation first is because I think, you and I talked about this book long before, we sold it, because, it was your Substacks about Moscow and what a very unusual place it was, and the tensions in that town that really piqued my interest. And I thought, well, this book could potentially be a bit like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which is the story of a community and the story of a place as much as it is the story of the awful murders. So,
And I
anyway,
think too how the murders redefine, the
yeah.
town is sort of now defined by this tragedy and how they move past it, right? But so did you have trouble connecting with some of the students and stuff? Did they trust you? Did they know who you
So
were
they
and what your
did.
intentions?
So it was a combination. So Rand Walker, given that he's a therapist and he had been the police therapist, he, did a lot of groundwork for me. I mean, he got quite into it, which was very, very helpful. And, when I got to Moscow, he drove me around and showed me the lay of the land and took me to Koberger's house and to the King Road house. But he also introduced me to, for example, two retired police officers, but one who had been James Fry, the police chief's ride-along partner. And in the middle, when I sat down to have coffee with the guys called Paul Kwiatkowski, we talked for about an hour, and he suddenly leapt up and said, "Come with me." And we got into his truck and we drove down to the police station. And he walked through the door. The receptionist obviously knew him because he'd only recently retired. And we went straight up to James Fry's office. And the police chief happened to be sitting in his office, actually trying on a new bulletproof vest. and and he looked at me because I had already emailed him, and he said, I think I know who you are. But Paul then sat down, so I sat down too. And that was the beginning of such a long conversation, actually, that funny story, I got a parking ticket, which I had to pay.
During that visit, during that meeting.
But 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 once you're in the room, I think I'm good at getting people to trust me. And it was definitely, I mean, the reason I wanted to write this book was because my twin sons were the exact same age as the victims. They were in college at the same time. And there was something, and I remember it was right before Thanksgiving. And I remember when my kids came back from their respective colleges, sitting at the Thanksgiving table, thinking, oh my God, those poor families, this must be the worst Thanksgiving they've ever had. And then the weeks ticked by, and suddenly all the kids were now back again for Christmas. And we still had no idea who had done this. And you would see on the TV, there was this sort of very pretty town covered in snow. There was Chief Fry on the news, not looking particularly confident, it must be said. And you just wondered, what on earth could have happened here. But I think the fact that my kids were the same age went a long way to building trust. It certainly helped me. I mean, I became very close with Stacey Chapin, Ethan's mum. And, I think the fact that Chapins were triplets, are triplets, I have son, we had a lot to talk about. It just made it easier to have some common ground. And I think that the people in Moscow and the families knew that I knew how to talk to their kids in a way that would be empathetic and sympathetic and not triggering.
Right.
Because that's obviously a big concern.
And so how would you describe the area that the King wrote, that their house was in? That was sort of the party zone, right? Like, I mean, it seems like
But so I was, before I went there, all the reports said it was off campus. So I thought, oh, well, one of my sons was in an off campus house, and it was kind of like half a mile or a mile away from the central hub of the university. No, I mean, the King Road house, it was a bit of that was almost misleading. You stood in the middle of the University of Idaho campus where all of the big classrooms and administrative buildings are. You could see 1122 King Road right there. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't really off campus. I mean, barely. I mean, it was, it was in the middle of the area where a lot of the kids would hang out on weekends and evenings. It was in the party bit. I mean, the other end of campus.
And their house was the house, right? That's where, that was known as like.
It was one of them. I mean, it was, everyone knew it because its distinguishing feature was that deck. I mean, now the house has been pulled down, but it had this big deck at the back of the house. Sadly, because that's obviously how I think the police believed that Koberger actually, got in, because there was a sliding door.
So that's the other thing is you really go through, because we know now based on the reporting in this book how exactly he got in and who he targeted first and all of that, right? Do you want to talk about that? It's very chilling description because we haven't really seen it pieced together that way in such concise, timeline. And I was never sure how he got in the house or why. Well, I guess you can start with because he met Maddie, right? Was it Maddie at the restaurant? Well,
so this is where, I mean, there are still so many questions, but the families believe, and the best friends believe, and again, they are guessing because there was when they first saw Koberger's face flash up on the news when he was arrested, it didn't make any sense to them. As far as they knew, they didn't know him. Um, but and Emily Allant, who sort of shared with me her thought process, um, definitely thought that somehow Maddie, and I think all the families believe that Maddie was the target. Maddie is whose room you can see directly, or you could see directly into from the back of the house, which was the only place you could have sat in a car and
Yes,
look.
it's
I
very
went to
easy to see.
retrace the footsteps. Yeah. So the only place you could have been in a car, a stationary car, was at this cul-de-sac at the back of the house. And there's only one bedroom you could have looked sort of into. And that was Maddie Mogan's. And you would have known it was hers because she had pink cowboy boots and Maddie spelt in the bedroom window. And Lexi Pattinson, of AFI sorority sister who lived next door, told me that, she would most nights leave her apartment and walk to her car parked at the back, and she would see the lights would be bright on, and she would see Maddie through the window putting on her makeup at her vanity or curling her hair.
So,
And
do they think he was watching her? In
so what Emily's dream that, in her imagination, and Maddie was very, very, very pretty, blonde, the sorority girl. She waitressed at the Mad Greek restaurant, which, served a lot of vegan food. We know Koberger was vegan. And um, her room is the one that's visible from the road, the police put him there, 12 times or so since between the night of the murders and I think August of that year. And because her room was the room he went directly to when he went to the King Road house. And she was the first person he killed. And on social media, the other thing that was shared with me was that it was Maddie more than the others whose social media posts he liked. I mean, there were some with Kaylee, but the ones with Kaylee were always when she was with Maddie. I mean, if you took
so,
Maddie, if you
is
took
there
Maddie
evidence of him
alone,
liking them?
sorry,
Is there evidence of him liking those or watching those?
yeah, they
Oh,
they they found the social media footprint. I mean, some of Kaylee too, but as I understand it, the ones of Kaylee were
with her in them.
the one. Yes, exactly. And so, and you have to remember that Kaylee had already left the King Road house. Her stuff wasn't there. She had packed up long ago. She was living at home, getting ready to go and take up a job in Texas and go and travel. Um, so she was only there that night completely by chance because she had got a new car and had driven in to show it to Maddie, and it was football day weekend. So, they had decided to hang out for the weekend. And Xana was only randomly awake. And so he went up to Maddie's room and he was bumped into Xana, who coming down the stairs on
Because she was
because she
awake.
was up because she had just got this food delivery. And we know she was up because the way Xana was killed, she fell back into the room sort of from the door. So she was feet first, if you see what I mean, facing
Yes,
up.
I did.
So, and then Ethan had been asleep. I mean, Ethan was out, and one has to assume that he thought that Ethan, just because he was a, very tall, physical, athletic guy, even though he was sound asleep,
So that was a detail I had not heard when the description in the book says that he was found sideways, laying on his side on the bed. I
looking against the wall. Yeah.
So he was attacked in his sleep.
Yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so if you think about it, it then makes, people say, well, why did he not go after Dylan Mortensen if he saw her? Well, one, she's come out, she has her door open. She's able to shut the door quickly. But if you go, and this is obviously speculative, but it's kind of informed speculation. But if you go on the theory that um, he went there intending to kill one person, and then
That
you know
changes everything. Yeah. Or not
and then
everything, but
and then there's somebody else in the band. I mean, now the Gonzalez, there is a line in the book. I deliberately kept it to one line, but to be sensitive and all, that. So Kaylee woke up, and there's evidence of that. I mean,
a fight,
um,
right? A struggle.
yeah, and so I think that if you then think that then he's coming down, he runs into Xana, and then there's a struggle, and then Ethan. By the time he's on his way out and he walks past Dylan's room, um, to walk out the front door. I mean, one, we know he made a mistake. I mean, it would have been the perfect crime, perfect murders if he hadn't left that knife sheath. So, I mean, he thought about this, but if you think that he'd made one mistake, and somebody said to me the amount of adrenaline and energy it would take to do all that in a short space of time, I mean,
So, and it's not
you'd
like
be,
he went
you'd
there
be
planning to
I don't
massacre
think
an
so.
entire.
I
Okay, so
don't think so.
that's sort of a big difference to what we has been theorized. But I mean, I think one of the things that you do bring clarity to too is the two roommates and why they waited so long to call for help. When I read that part, it all made a lot more sense as far as like timing and them not really knowing what was going on and what they were hearing.
Right. Well, one of
Because
them,
she did make eye contact with him, and but so she ran into her. It was Dylan ran into Bethany's room.
right. Well, Bethany wouldn't. I don't. Bethany didn't hear a thing. I mean, and when you saw that
'Cause
house,
it's
right,
like,
when it was up,
yeah,
because it
it's
was
stacked.
right. I mean, in the basement, she would have been really kind of far away
Yeah.
uh, from everything. So that, I think, makes sense. And I mean, look, Dylan's perspective is very much coming to me from her Emily Allant, who was her big sister, what they called it in the sorority, her great friend, and Emily, who along with her boyfriend Hunter Johnson were the first two people called to that house the next day, is by Dylan, is very protective of Dylan, because she said, imagine if there you are in the middle of the night, it is a party house, people do come and go all night, it's been a massive football game day at
Yeah.
the college. Dylan, this is a young college student who has seen crazy things when she's had too much to drink before, and she looks out of her room and she just she questions, and she sees this guy is not and she thinks he's a firefighter. And I mean,
Yeah,
what
that
the
was really
black
interesting. She thought he
what
was a
the black
firefighter.
well, she said, and she in that, and this again, it was good to see, because when Emily first said to me, well, she thought he was carrying a vacuum, I was like, a vacuum? But then it appeared in the court papers that he was carrying what looked like a black vacuum. And I mean, I think probably if we all kind of woke up in the middle of the night and we saw someone carrying what looked like in a mask carrying a black vacuum, we might wonder if we were hallucinating.
Oh, how scary.
And 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 I think it's very telling that Emily's reaction when Dylan phoned her the next morning and said, I think something terrible has happened, that her best friend doesn't go, oh my gosh, she said, oh yeah, don't be ridiculous. ha ha, shall I
Yeah.
bring my pepper spray? It tells you that this was a nervous young woman who'd kind of had crazy like visions before when she drank too much and she was questioning herself. So I think one feels a bit of compassion. Um,
I think
actually,
it
that
makes a
probably
lot. I
did.
think reading that whole section makes a lot
Yeah.
more sense. And that's one of the things that I've discussed a lot with my audience when, we couldn't figure out that time stretch. And another point that I learned in the book is that the families did not have public funerals for the kids. Were they still so the killer was still at large then, right? Is that
Right. So what happened? I mean, so this is why the book is about much bigger themes. One of being the harm of social media, the harm of the true crime mania in this country now. That because the Chapins did go ahead and have a huge funeral for Ethan a week later, and over 1,000 people came, but none of the other families did. They were afraid. Emily Allant, didn't, and Hunter Johnson didn't go to Ethan's funeral. They were terrified that whoever had done this was coming for them next. And then on top of it all, they were trolled because all these, there was all this speculation that they must be the murderers themselves. I mean, they went through hell. And as it turned out, the Gonzalez and the Laramie families, Maddie and Kaylee's families, ultimately they planned their services. As it turned out, they didn't know this was going to happen, but that Koberger was in fact arrested the night before those services. So they obviously went ahead feeling a great deal better, although still just completely befuddled as to who this guy was. But at least they knew that the police had somebody now in custody.
well, and it's interesting too with the true crime. We're in this new era of social media where these theories kind of go crazy. And in one sense, the police were asking the public for help, right? They wanted to know if they had the video of the car. And so it's like they ask for help, but then it can also easily spiral into, I
Right.
understand all kinds of theories too, because there was this, frantic, we wanted to understand how and why it happened. And in that, these conspiracy sleuths come up with like all
Well,
kinds of,
and I think two things. The police chief was very honest with me and said, I made a mistake. It had nothing to do with the police work. He was very proud of everything that the police did, working with the FBI and the state police. It was to do with mishandling communication. Because what he realized is that all his years of training, which had told him to say nothing, particularly in a case where you've no idea who the murderer is, you don't want to say anything that could tip off um, the person out there. You don't want to say anything that could jeopardize the investigation. But in the world we live in, that was a mistake. And he would, because then all these speculative conspiracy theories flooded the zone. And then actually the police then had to waste a huge amount of time clearing people who'd got absolutely nothing to do with it. And then on top of it, which is, I think, another really important theme in the book, which is that the victims' families have much fewer rights than I think most of us realize. They were very much kept in the dark. Sometimes Steve Gonsalves would say to me, I think you know more about what happened to my daughter than I do, Vicki. And I was sort of struck by that. And they are looking at everything they read on the internet. And so there can be, I think, a great deal of harm caused. And I think James Fry, the police chief, would say that in the modern world, part of law enforcement's training now must include how to deal with the media, because that's where he had no experience at all. But I also think, going back to your point about what the police went to the public asking for help, I think the other thing that hasn't really become clear until our book was being published this morning, is how really without the DNA, without this new methodology of investigative genetic genealogy using these public, sites like Ancestry and Me, Ancestry.com or 23andMe, where they're able to take this tiny piece of DNA and then construct a family tree and get to, and this is really a new method that's only come into play in the last 4 or 5 years or so.
Yeah.
That until the lab, and it took them 5 weeks or so, until the lab came back with the name Brian Koberger, they didn't have anything. The car by itself, they couldn't see it clearly. They kept, they sort of got eventually to a Nissan. Then they had the wrong year. And Koberger knew exactly what he was doing because he didn't have front license plates on the night of the murders. It was only after that he switched out his Pennsylvania plates for Washington State plates. And so
it really was
they
that
really
trace
flying
DNA.
blind.
So that little trace DNA on the sheet. I mean, it's still so hard for me to comprehend how such a bloody scene he escaped, and without leaving all sorts of, like not bleeding himself or
Well,
wounding himself.
they never found the murder weapon. They never found trace of anything in his car. They never found clothes that he was wearing. I mean, that was
So
the
he did
night.
everything outside of the sheath perfect. A perfect murder.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about, this is one of the crazy, I think you guys probably all remember going through the Papa Rogers
Yeah.
mystery. That was very crazy because we were reading, it was on Reddit, right? I remember we were following it.
Yes, but it was also, so Papa Roger was a character on the Facebook page.
Okay.
And so there was this Facebook page that was started by 2 friends who ended up, the book tells the story, they kind of fell out actually. But the Facebook page sort of became the go-to page about the murders. And there was this character, Papa Roger, who, he had an avatar, sort of creepy looking.
I totally remember his avatar, but
Yeah.
it did look like Brian Koberger.
It did. It did. And this guy was belligerent, but he also, he asked, or he would either ask questions or say things that turned out, in hindsight, to be eerily true. I mean, he went on and on about the knife sheath being,
yes, when nobody was talking about a knife sheath.
Right. And yes, and I mean, he had all these things which creeped people out. And then of course it was really when and then they chucked him off right as Koberger was arrested. And so and it's certainly true, the police, James Fry, was absolutely somebody in that investigation, was paying enough attention to be busy monitoring that Facebook page and was paying close attention to whoever Papa Roger was. Whether or not Papa Roger was in fact Brian Koberger, the book doesn't go there. Nobody ever said to me.
So that hasn't been
but no one ever.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, because if I remember correctly, Papa Rogers knew the series of deaths, like the
Yes.
point of entry and all point of entry, series of attacks, and then the sheath was a big thing. It was really creepy. I think you guys were probably a lot of you remember.
And he said things like, "I think the guys left the area," and it turned out in hindsight.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. All these things that when you went back and looked at it, you were like, Well, either he's clairvoyant or he is Brian Koberger, but
Well, and it's interesting too, because you introduce a lot of these little sub characters who came into contact with him, in the months and weeks before the murders. And so them, just learning what they thought about everything,
well, I think
realizing they had these interactions with the monster.
no, and of course, and they beat themselves up because they're advanced criminology students, and they want to go out into the world and use everything they've learned and their skills to prevent crime. And here was this guy who turned out to be in their midst. So that was not a great feeling. But I think that the book does give a kind of clear picture of Brian Koberger arriving at Washington State University for a PhD. I mean, this ought to be the summit of his life to this point. This is a guy who's overcome heroin addiction, who's had no friends, who's been, 150 pounds overweight, who's on the spectrum, and yet now he's got to Washington State University. And I think what the book shows is that he has this inability to keep what he thinks about women to himself, and that really rapidly everything goes wrong for him because he just can't hold it together, whether in class or out of class. He cannot control his disdain for women, and it gets him into trouble very, very quickly. And you sort of see his plummet to the bottom where he's about to lose absolutely everything. I mean, he's going to lose his teaching position, which means he's going to lose his funding for this, PhD, everything he's worked for, and you see him physically disintegrate. I mean, I think it's a very awful moment where his classmate starts to type out this care form and then worries, thinks Koberger is so weird and creepy that he deletes it because he doesn't ever want it to come back on him. But also this awful car ride that the same guy, Ben Roberts, ends up taking a lift from Koberger, and Koberger unloads on him what he really thinks about women and how he could go into a bar and have any woman he wants.
That was such a weird...
And that women belong in the bedroom, the kitchen, and all this stuff. And you just... And you just sort of, you really see this guy kind of disintegrate into despair, I think. I mean, completely self-inflicted. But I think you get that sense. And I think one of the questions that the book raises, that is a very relevant question in the country right now, is about the role of universities and the First Amendment, the question of when does free speech become dangerous? And should Washington State University have done more? I mean, this guy, there were lots of red flags, right? And, should they have done something? Could they have done something? That was a question that the families definitely talked to me about. And I think were wondering if it had gone to trial, if they would have learnt more about what Wazoo knew about this guy in their midst. I think they were keen to hear that, but now they're not going to, obviously.
So that's one of the big things that'll be missing from any conclusion. What about, you also you go into detail about Elliot Rodger. It's Rodger, right?
Yeah.
And his manifesto being sort of the driving inspiration, because I thought it was Ted Bundy, but he was very inspired by this guy.
I was familiar with both, right, Jess? I mean, I spoke to Catherine Ransland. She showed his class the Elliot Rodger video.
Where was it posted? Where was Elliot Rodger's posting? Like, what was his platform?
You can watch it on the internet. You can see his video.
It's still there?
Oh yeah, and the manifesto is on the internet. I've read the whole thing. Oh yeah.
Okay, you guys. People are asking questions. You guys, I'll wait till we'll go till like 12, but I'll spend the last 10 minutes asking Vicki some of your questions, but I'll also find that video in the manifesto so you can read that too. But there's a lot of detail in the book that I've never heard before about who sort of inspired this,
Well, listen,
violence.
I mean, Coburg, again, I obviously expected that there would be a trial, but there are just some very striking similarities with Elliot Rodger. I mean, it was another college student living between two college towns, another guy who, seemed outwardly looked like life was going pretty well for him. He was a wealthy, privileged guy, but who was seething with rage inside about being rejected by women. And again, this guy, clearly took his time. I mean, if you read Elliot Rodger's manifesto, I mean, he really thought out what he was going to do and the performative aspect of it. He'd also had he had a thing about sorority girls, blonde sorority girls that he wrote about. He'd had a friend called Maddie, who he was definitely targeting. He'd also, he'd lost his only kind of male friend shortly before he went out and killed. He did a spree killing and then killed himself. And Koberger's only childhood friend he did die of a drug overdose in 2021. I mean, they weren't still hanging out at that point, but so I mean, there were just. I don't pretend to have definitive answers. I just give you the facts, and the readers must decide for themselves.
And so he was. I mean, Koberger was very smart. You would say he was a very intelligent person. Very. Okay.
Yes, I mean his classmates. I mean, there's one woman, Brittany Slavin. I mean, who said, she copied from him at DeSales University. I mean, she yeah. I mean, he was extremely smart, and that's why he ended up at Washington State University, because one of his professors, Michelle Bolger, recommended him. I mean, which is I think the second time ever she's done that. I mean, he stood out for his intelligence.
And so in his defense, when we were planning on a trial, do you know anything about what they were planning on bringing forward I mean, it's crazy that they had all these months that they were really moving towards a defense, but then he was.
But were they just? I mean, what was the defense? I mean, for a long, long, long time, it felt like they were going to try and fight the prosecution over the IGG, over the fact that in the end, that the way that they got to his name was when they sent it to a lab down in Texas, and they didn't get anywhere with the genealogical websites that lab used, or I think they did get to some brothers who refused to speak to law enforcement, and that was that. And then we get into the sort of middle of December, and then the FBI uses a different lab, and this lab runs the DNA through websites which customers have not given permission for. They have not signed off and said that their DNA can be used. Now, the law is a grey area on this, because in the law is written that says the FBI can use its discretion, and in a very serious case, they can go into a website where customers have not expressly signed off and said their DNA can be used for cases like this. The defense spent a long time going down this whole avenue of the IGG being, not. They wanted the IGG chucked out. They were going to say it was unconstitutional, blah, blah, invasion of his privacy. Took them months and months and months, and eventually the judge shut them down on that. So once they were shut down on that avenue, well, then they were the alibi. But what was the alibi? He was stargazing. And then, well, it was somebody else. Well, who else? I mean, I think you have to believe the fact that we got so close to trial and then this happened was that you have to believe they were out of options.
Right.
I mean,
How
DNA, you can look at it two ways. I mean, somebody once said to me, well, if the knife sheath is all they've got, well, isn't that a problem? On the other hand, his DNA is on a knife sheath left by the bed. I mean,
yeah, that's
it's
yeah.
pretty, it's pretty compelling, you know. I mean, it's hard to
Yeah.
argue with that.
Well, okay, let me see a couple other of my questions. Okay, what about the aftermath, the families? I mean, you go through the whole while Koberger's kind of on the loose, and I don't know if he suspects that they're watching him at that point. Like, was he paranoid and panicked, or did he feel like he
Well,
had gotten away with? He knew he left
well,
the sheath.
well, you know, I mean, number one, because there was all that speculation in hindsight of, you know, did the police know when they pulled him over on that drive across country with his dad? No, the answer is no. We know now. Nobody knew until I think December the 20th, and they drove cross country, he and his dad, on December the 15th, December the 16th. So he was, and and he's quite composed when he's talking, when they're pulled over, and he, gets into a whole narrative about where they're driving from and where they're going. But we do know that when he gets to Pennsylvania, he goes off and he gets his car completely cleaned. And we also know that he's wearing gloves to throw out the trash. And he's throwing things in the neighbor's trash. So in fact, when the FBI come to see if they can find his DNA initially, they don't find it. They find his dad's. And on the basis of his father's DNA, that they get a warrant to then go in and do the dawn raid. And it's only then when they've actually, busted into the house and arrested him that they swab him. And it's only when they swab him that they get the exact match with what's on the knife sheath. So in other words, he was doing a pretty, he was being very, very careful.
What did the family think about them tearing the house down so soon in the middle of the night?
You mean the victim's family is about 1122 King Road? Well, obviously the Gonzalez family were completely on record as saying they were really concerned that it was too soon, and that worried that a jury, when it came to it, might need stuff inside of there. And it is true that when they protested the first time round, and then in fact law enforcement did go back into the house. And then so that I think sort of told Steve Gonzalez, felt like it backed up his point of view that the house shouldn't be torn down. Having said that, the Chapins thought it was time, again, the families have been very split this whole way along, which I think tells you something also
Even
about
down to
back
now, the trial, right? They're still
What?
divided over. They're still divided over the plea bargain, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are happy with it or relieved by it, and then others
Yeah.
are upset.
Well, I think so. The Chapins have taken the view the whole way along that nothing's bringing back Ethan, and as far as I know, they're not planning to go to the sentencing of Koberger next week. And they got along very well with the police and with the prosecutor. The Gonzalez family felt that they were just kept in the dark and not really given any guidance by
Although
the
you do
prosecutor.
explain in the book why I did have a different understanding after reading the
Yeah.
police side. Yeah, it made sense that they.
Well, hopefully that you read the book and you understand everybody's point of view. I mean, I wasn't in there to make any judgments. This terrible, terrible thing has happened, and everybody's point of view is valid, and everyone's experience is different. I think, and I know that the Gonzalez family's feeling about the plea deal was they felt very sort of ambushed by it. And I think that it's not necessarily that the fact of it, it's the how it all unfolded. And I think that they had just felt the whole way along that their feelings and their rights were kind of ignored by the process. Meanwhile, Koberger was given every right. I mean, that's just how our justice system
Yeah.
works. And then at the 11th hour, this thing was kind of foisted on them, and that they didn't, yet again, I think they felt they had no voice or no say in what happened. My understanding, as of at the end of last week, is that they're also, I think, they're when they go to the sentencing, there are severe restrictions on what they are allowed to say. So it's not like they're able to stand up and say, here, Brian Koberger, is what you've done to me, and then just say exactly what they feel. No, that the judges put boundaries on that.
What about the sentencing? Will he be forced to answer anything or give any, like, is he?
I don't know. I think as far as, again, I understand it, having spoken to the Gonzalez family, no.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna let you guys I'm gonna take some questions if that's okay, Vicki. Do you want
Of
to take some
course.
questions from? So the book's out today, and you can follow Vicki's Substack. It's one of my favorites because we have similar interest in topics. You know that she has all the Epstein stuff too, which we probably need another conversation
I
about.
know, for
I'm
sure.
like, don't get me started on the Ghislaine and Jeffries beat right now. But okay, so the book's out, but let me see. What are your guys' questions for Vicki? Let's take a few before she moves on to her next appearance. Oh my God, my chair is broken. Okay. Let's see. Let me pull up. How do I okay. What questions do you guys have? Do they have Aryan Knights operating in that area? Have you heard anything about that theory? The Aryan Knights?
I've not.
No.
Oh, no, and they're not talking about the church. No.
No. We addressed the delay from the roommates. That's all in the book. It explains, once you read the whole morning of the murder, everything makes a lot more sense. But someone was saying that he's allowed. They were wondering about him asking if they arrested anyone else. Is that true? Did that happen?
No.
No. Okay. Social media link between Brian and the girls.
Yeah.
You there's proof
Yes.
of that.
That exists.
So people want you to expand a little bit on that because they thought there was absolutely no connection between him knowing or watching the girls, but the phone forensics say there was, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No, I mean that. Yes, and you probably noticed that. I mean, one of the very early warrants you could see from the court record that the police went after was everybody's social media accounts to see what had happened. He definitely was following Maddie, and I believe he had liked social media of all three women, but the one that there was a sort of definite focus on was Maddie Mogan.
Okay. Was his dad called in and questioned for what he knows about the knife sheath? And
that I don't know the answer to that, but one has to assume. I mean, the parents, were right there. I mean, there is a fascinating scene in the book towards the end where Michael Koberger, his dad, tells a neighbor, the mother of Brian's only childhood friend who has tragically died, and Michael Koberger tells this woman, and he sees her in a pharmacy, tells her that Brian's going to be, everyone's going to see that Brian's innocent and that the whole thing was drug related, and that was only a year ago. I mean, the neighbor didn't, I think, believe him. But that is what he said. I mean, given that, we know, I mean, some of the people in the book, like the boxing coach, Brian's boxing coach, were being subpoenaed to come to the trial. And so that they would have got to the boxing coach through Michael, through the father. So, I mean, somebody would have talked to the dad, probably Koberger's defense lawyers.
And they're asking, in your opinion, do you feel like the police handled the case? How do you think the police handled the case?
In the end, I think, James Fry he said, it's extraordinary to have that number of, every day they had a meeting at 8:00 in the morning, and then they had another one around 5 or 6 o'clock. And there were 80 people, mix of FBI, state police, and the local and Moscow PD all in one room. And I think he felt that there was never friction, and there were no leaks. And he thought that was pretty impressive. And the only time he didn't give himself an A was about this issue of communication. And there is also a very dramatic scene again towards the end of the book. And the other thing in hindsight was the irony of the fact that normally the Moscow PD, there are only like 24 of them. If there's a big crime in Moscow, they radio over to the Pullman police department, which is also very small, but these two towns are 10 minutes apart from each other. And they normally get each other involved because if somebody's done something dreadful and is hightailing it out of the area, the chances are they have to drive through the other town on their way out. So these two police departments know each other well. The police chiefs know each other well. But because they had no idea who did these murders, this was the one time where the Moscow Police Department froze out the Pullman team. And of course, the irony, it turned out, was that Brian Koberger had lived in Pullman. That's where Washington State University is. So there's this very dramatic scene where right before New Year, Gary Jenkins had been the police chief in Pullman for 12 years, but has just been moved to run the Washington State University and campus. And he gets this call and is told to come over to Moscow by himself. And he walks into this room packed, and they say, we're going to arrest a guy, and he's on your watch. He lives on Washington State University housing. And when they tell him the name, he goes, "Oh my God, I know him." And I mean, it's a terrible, ironic moment, because it turns out that Gary Jenkins had interviewed Koberger a few months previously on Zoom, because Koberger had applied for an intern position at the police department, which Gary Jenkins did not give him. So that's kind of that was a big moment.
Okay, let's see. The DoorDash driver said on body cam footage she was friends with Bill Thompson, the lead prosecutor.
Well, she knew Bill Thompson because she would have had to have given evidence at trial. So obviously she had met the prosecutors.
Okay. Is that it, you guys? I have a question. I want to know, writing about murders, especially with, in this situation, these young college students, how did writing this book change you or affect you?
Well, I definitely, I went back and I quizzed my sons all about the world of incels and about the world. It really woke me up to the dangers of what's on the internet, and how, because of COVID and just because of the age we live in, that, you and I, Jessica, I think we probably, when we were like teenagers in our 20s, if somebody was sitting in their room, you probably thought they were pretty safe. And I mean, this book is one, there's been a lot of evidence showing that now sitting alone in your bedroom can be extremely dangerous and harmful to people. And I think this book reinforces that. I on the look, this is a dark topic about the absolute worst of human nature, but it also, in a way, is about the best of people. And it's brought me, I've gotten to become very, very close to the families, which has made my life richer. I've become very close to the police chief and to various people in Moscow, which has made, my life richer for it. And I think that, I think the book, The Risk of Sounding Really Corny, is about the fragility of things and how this unspeakable thing happened to four young adults in Moscow, Idaho, but it could happen to any of us. And that's really, in a way, why I think the book is an important read, because as sad as it is, it's about all of us in a way.
That's what I liked about it. I feel like it's it stretches the lens really wide, and there's a lot in here. Somebody's asking for the book title again. It is The Idaho for an American Tragedy. There you guys see it. You can purchase or go out and buy it today.
And I think, Jess, it is important. It is called The Idaho 4. And I think that the parents have been very supportive of the book because it's not exploitive.
It's not.
And Ethan, Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana get to live in a way through the book. And so that's a very, very good thing. They won't be forgotten.
Yes, I think you guys did a really good job with it. Nothing is sensational or exploitive, and you give voice to all the friends that it affected too. That this is a hugely traumatic event they went through. So yes, you guys are asking questions about, does it go through the time frame or like the step or the everything. The timeline of the murder, yes, it's all the details are in here. It's very easy to read. I think as of right now, based on, the decision to take a plea, this is probably the most concise recap of it. So anyway, thank you so much, Vicki, for taking the hour out. And I can't wait to have you back for all this other drama that's going on, because we have so many things to talk about.
Because it was you and your Substack. I remember it.
That. Do you guys hear that?
I remember phoning you saying, "What do you think? Do you think?" And you were like, "Yeah, go do a book."
I loved it, and now here we are.
Here we are.
Right? We love Substack.
I know.
All right. Well, good luck with all the interviews and appearances today, and we will. I can talk to you guys. I'll do an article, and we can discuss the book in a chat later.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.